This was meant to be a straightforward Northern Lights cruise along the coast of Norway in the depths of winter. But within days, we were sailing through hurricane-force winds, navigating blizzards, and watching our carefully planned itinerary begin to change. And somewhere along the way, we had to ask ourselves, were we actually going to see the Northern Lights at all? This is what happened. So near, and yet so far. You can just see Cunard's Queen Victoria in the distance, but we were at a standstill. We were supposed to be meeting my parents at the terminal, and I was beginning to worry. The problem was, Queen Victoria herself was late. A medical evacuation on the previous voyage had delayed her arrival, and the terminal simply couldn't cope. Eventually, though, we finally made it through. My mum had called, clearly stressed. There were crowds and chaos, and no one seemed to know what was going on. It was their first ever cruise, and they're both in their 80s, and I was stuck in traffic, completely unable to help. Were they okay? And then, just like that, everything changed. You step out of the chaos into this. And Mum and Dad? Turns out I needn't have worried. They'd already made it on board and were settling in rather nicely. This cruise was to celebrate their diamond wedding anniversary, and they hadn't done things by halves. They'd booked Queen's Grill, Cunard's first class, and when Dad suggested we join them, it didn't take much persuasion. I'll come back to what this cost at the end, because it's not an inexpensive trip. This was the start of our Northern Lights cruise. 13 nights, all the way up the Norwegian coast, deep inside the Arctic Circle, calling at places like Andalsnes, Tromsø, Narvik, and further south, Alesund and Stavanger. Or so we thought. After visiting our muster station in the Grand Lobby, we headed straight to our Queen's Grill suite. I'll publish a full suite tour in a separate video, but here's a brief look for now. After the chaos of embarkation, this felt like a different world entirely. By now, we were properly underway, leaving everything behind and heading north. We'd never seen the Northern Lights before, and of course there are no guarantees, but you can't help but wonder, will we be lucky enough to see them? A day at sea isn't about rushing, it's about settling into the rhythm of the ship. And for us, that meant time with Mum and Dad, including things I hadn't expected, like line dancing.
the left with start pupils and up left. I'm going to
There's always something going on. Back in our suite, another small reminder of life in Queen's Grill. Evening canapes, delivered by our butler just before dinner. And then it's time to dine. Dinner in Queen's Grill is an occasion in itself. Here's today's menu. Feel free to pause if you'd like a closer look.
You never say never, you just go on and
Alright?
just leave the whole thing to
Good. Please enjoy. Bon appetit, everyone. Thank you.
A perfect end to our first full day at sea. By now, we were well on our way.
Queen Victoria has steamed a total distance of 415 nautical miles at an average speed of just over 18 knots. We do have a further 245 nautical miles to run until we make our approaches towards the pilot station in order to commence our transit towards Andalsnes. Our current position places us some 226 nautical miles from John O'Groats out on our port beam. Well, weather-wise, the visibility has improved, the skies have continued to clear, and we now have partly cloudy skies, with an increased wind state from the southwest at 30 knots. This wind is picking up the sea state and is causing the additional movement of the ship that we're seeing today. Ladies and gentlemen, please do enjoy your second afternoon and evening at sea on board the elegant Queen Victoria.
Inside, life on board continued as normal, but behind the scenes, things were becoming more complicated. Then we began to slow, unusually slow, a medical emergency on board and a helicopter evacuation in the open sea.
Our helicopter operations are now complete. We must now, once again, complete a 180-degree turn to starboard to resume our passage towards Andalsnes. The patient is now en route to the required medical facility to receive the treatment that they need. Unfortunately, given our turn and the operation, there will be an impact to our arrival time tomorrow in Andalsnes. Attention ship's company. This evening, you have all achieved an extraordinary event by showing that individual departments can come together as one to deliver an outstanding performance towards the benefit of the patient. I thank you for your support and timely assistance.
By the evening, things had settled down again.
Bon appetit, everybody.
Our first stop, deep inside the Norwegian fjords.
As we have now just cleared 8 o'clock, it is an ideal time to provide an update regarding our scheduled arrival time. Well, we embarked the pilot just before 4 o'clock, and then entered the confines of the fjord and the sheltered waters shortly before 5:30. We do now have approximately 9 miles to run to our berth. Outside the window, we do have partly cloudy skies, light airs, and a crisp 5 degrees Celsius, 41 degrees Fahrenheit air temperature. Given our current progress, I do anticipate approaching the berth at 9:15 this morning to then be all fast alongside, ready for gangway movements to commence at 9:30. Thank you.
The Golden Train was named after a remarkable story from the Second World War, when Norway's gold reserves were secretly transported through these mountains, hidden from the Nazis in the tunnels along this very line. It's a short journey, but one packed with history.
A very famous Norwegian author has described the landscape around here with this quote. He told us about Andalsnes, a small village in Romsdal, surrounded by high mountains, where it was so beautiful that his mother had always said this is where God had started when he created the world, that he spent so much time in the nature in Romsdalen that the rest of the world had to be made in a hurry to be finished by Sunday. And this was written by no other than Joe Nesbo. And we hope you all agree with Joe Nesbo by the end of the trip that it really is a fantastic country. There out the window to the right, you can see one of the most famous mountains here in Romsdal. Romsdal Horn, and that's because it looks like it's a large horn on top of the mountain. And it stands 1,550 metres above sea level. I can tell you a story about this famous mountain. If you go right back to a late summer evening in 1828. There was a wedding here in the valley, and 2 of the guests began boasting a bit too much about how good they were at climbing mountains. So they maybe drank a little bit too much at the party. And suddenly they made a bet with the other locals that they would be the first to climb the infamous Romsdal Horn. So the next morning they set out, and when they returned late in the evening, they proudly told how they had climbed Romsdal Horn. But of course there were no cameras at the time, so naturally no one believed them. And the feared mountain retained its title as unclimbed. It wasn't until 50 years later on that professional Danish mountaineer Carl Hall was determined to be the first to climb the infamous Romsdal Horn. On his 7th attempt to reach the top, he finally succeeded. As he looked over the edge, he could see with his own eyes the small stone cairn that the 2 local boys had erected 50 years earlier. Carl Hall confirmed this earlier ascent, and for his honesty he was rewarded with Norway's most famous second ascent, and the route he climbed was named Hall's Gully. So I guess honesty does pay after all. So coming up on the right hand side now is the mighty Troll Wall, or Trollveggen. It looks absolutely spectacular in the sunlight today. So it's a good one for a photo. Trollveggen is Northern Europe's highest vertical rock face, and was first conquered by climbers in 1965. And a Norwegian and an English climbing team reached the top via separate routes within a day of each other. The Norwegian team came first, of course they did, but since then many have tried to climb Trollveggen, but it's very, very dangerous. Sadly, since 1966, a total of 21 people have lost their lives in Trollveggen, 12 in climbing accidents and 9 in base jumping accidents. And there have also been countless rescue operations, and with a vertical wall as a starting point, these are very difficult to carry out and put the rescue teams in risky situations. So today, base jumping from Trollveggen is illegal, but if you really want to strap on a wingsuit and jump off a mountain, then you can still fly from the top of Romsdal Horn, right up there to the left-hand side. So this section of the valley is called Marstein, and it looks absolutely fabulous in the sun today. And the waterfalls on both sides are just starting to melt now. Coming up on the right-hand side, you'll see why people have been coming here for generations. It's a beautiful Rauma River. Now in summer, it's a beautiful golden emerald colour, but it's a bit too frozen now in the winter to see the beautiful green colour. I'm going to go into the tunnel now. It's going to get dark. And this is the Stavanger switchback tunnel. So if there's any Harry Potter fans on board, they might notice this landscape over there on the right-hand side. And there's actually a film crew that came over to film the Half-Blood Prince here. The production team needed a train sequence with a snowy landscape. And of course they found it here. And the train featured in the film is actually an old Norwegian steam locomotive. So we get many of the Potterheads coming up here to wander around the landscape. We're arriving in Bjorley now.
Not a bad place for a family photo.
Thank you very much for travelling on the Golden Train. Thank you very much.
From the railway to something a little more vertical.
You're my son, you're my gondola.
Safe to say, spirits were high.
Listen to the wind. Can you hear the wind?
Yes.
We'll try.
A lot of people in the restaurant. Blocking edge. This is amazing. Right? Alright, we get up there. Brilliant.
By the time we returned, the weather had turned. And, as ever, dinner didn't disappoint.
Is that Irish coffee? Yeah. Cream. Lovely. Thank you very much. I'll be fat tomorrow.
No. Yeah. How many days more?
Done? What did you say?
It's saying, don't worry about it, Dad, I think is what it's saying about. It's saying, don't worry about it, Dad.
Live now, pay later.
Yeah.
Queen Victoria has just passed latitude 66 degrees, 34 minutes north, which means we have now officially passed into the Arctic Circle, so grab your coats. The Arctic Circle is the northernmost of Earth's 5 major circles of latitude. The Arctic Circle denotes the southernmost latitude, for which, at the winter solstice, the sun does not rise, and at the summer solstice, the sun does not set. These phenomena are referred to as polar night and midnight sun, respectively. Depending on how much further close to the poles you go, the longer this phenomenon lasts. For example, the city of Tromsø is so north that at the winter solstice the sun may not rise for up to 20 days.
Well, weather-wise, last night we did see winds in excess of 65 knots, which on the Beaufort scale moves into the hurricane force winds. This did bring with it the increased sea height, and for a brief moment this morning we did see somewhat calmer seas and fairer winds. But as expected, these winds have returned, and we are now experiencing 50 knots of wind from the north-northwest, which in Beaufort force scale is close to a force 10. The skies are mainly overcast. The sea state has increased to rough or very rough, and at present there is a 5-metre swell being driven in by the winds themselves. The outside air temperature is a refreshing 6 degrees Celsius for those who have braved the open decks that are open, which is 43 degrees Fahrenheit. Ladies and gentlemen, the sea states are scheduled to remain as they are now until very much the early hours of tomorrow morning. So I would urge you all, when moving around the ship, please do continue to remember one hand for yourself and one for the ship. Please do use the handrails where provided. And any guests who are already taking anti-motion sickness medication, I would urge you to continue doing so. Ladies and gentlemen, it is going to be a bumpy afternoon and evening ahead of us, so please do take care, but don't let it stop you from enjoying the internal public rooms and entertainment on board the elegant Queen Victoria.
Inside, life carried on. And with the worsening weather, I started to seriously doubt we'd see the Northern Lights on this trip.
An important announcement regarding our arrival into Tromsø tomorrow. Approximately 45 minutes ago, the ship received notification from the pilotage authority that our assigned pilot station has been closed due to the adverse weather conditions. There is positive news in that an alternative pilot station is available, although we do have a further 115 nautical miles to reach the northernmost pilot position. It is therefore with regret that I have to announce that our scheduled arrival time of 9 o'clock tomorrow morning is not going to be achievable. With that in mind, the earliest that I can be alongside tomorrow will be 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologise for this. It is outside of the ship's control and is not something that could have been foreseen. And I do wish you a pleasant evening on board. Thank you.
Another change beyond our control. And still, the day ended well.
Overnight, we have seen increasing snow. The wind continues to blow at 50 knots. All open decks have been closed for your safety.
And by this point, I'd given up on seeing the Northern Lights altogether. With weather like this, it just didn't feel possible. Any idea what might have left these footprints?
Gosh, it's driving slow, isn't it?
And then everything changed.
Well, a very good afternoon. The captain speaking from the bridge with some positive and favourable news. We have continued on the 37 miles down towards our berth. We do have just under 1 hour to go until we make our harbour approaches, Overnight we did make good speed. I do expect to be approaching our berth, secured shortly before 2 o'clock. Well, weather-wise, we do have light airs from the north, which is a somewhat difference to what we've encountered for the last 2 days. The seas have calmed, the snow has fallen, and I'm sure that many have enjoyed the sights of the ship's company building snowmen, creating snow angels, and at times writing the ship's name in the snow. The outside air temperature at present is a refreshing -1 degree Celsius. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we start to open the decks, please do take care. Thank you.
By early afternoon, we had made it to Tromsø.
Hello.
A short transfer into the city,
I love the catwalk house.
and our first glimpse of Tromsø. A small Arctic city surrounded by mountains and water. Later that afternoon, a brief moment of calm. And while we sat down to dinner, we had no idea what we were missing.
So that's mine. How long will the others take?
It was Tim who spotted them first.
Smoke. The smoke. No, it's green. No.
And then finally, they were there. After everything, it was worth the wait.
Well, a very good afternoon, everyone. This is the captain speaking from the bridge. And with the sounding of the ship's whistles, it marks midday on our individual sea day from Tromsø towards Narvik. We did follow the shortened route through the area that was closed on our arrival into Tromsø, and this allowed us to then begin our sea day passage towards Narvik. Our current position places us some 35 nautical miles from the town of Bleak out on our port side. Well, weather-wise, we do have mainly overcast skies. The sea state remains moderate to rough, and there is a swell height of 3 to 4 metres. We do already have our harbour pilot on board for Narvik. He jumped on board yesterday in Tromsø and will remain with us until we approach tomorrow morning. We do expect to continue on our south-southwesterly heading to then turn to a more easterly heading to pass between a narrow passage in the Lofoten Islands. We do expect to be entering the harbour confines at approximately 7:30 to then be all fast and alongside, ready for 9 o'clock. So please do enjoy your afternoon at sea on board the elegant Queen Victoria.
Narvik may not be the most picturesque stop on this journey, but it has a remarkable history. In 1940, this was the scene of fierce fighting. Control of this ice-free port mattered for the transport of iron ore. It stayed cloudy while we were in Narvik, but I was still hoping for clearer skies as we headed south.
And the forecast does indicate these seas will move from a moderate state as they are now to rough to possibly very rough.
Queen Victoria shrugged off the storm and we made it safely to Alesund. Our carriage awaits. We took the land train up to Mount Axela for a view over the town. And the rain just added to the atmosphere. You having fun? We headed back to the ship, but not for long. Later, Dad and I headed back out, this time in the snow. Much of Alesund was rebuilt after a devastating fire in 1904, giving it its distinctive Art Nouveau character. And as we left Alesund behind, it was hard not to feel this had been one of the more memorable stops.
I have made the decision to abort our call into Stavanger today. The wind conditions inside the harbour were blowing at times in excess of 30 knots, which, given the narrow harbour entrance and the tight swinging circle, would not have been tenable. I did consider slowing and hoping for the wind to ease, but the forecast does not indicate that as a possibility. So we will now commence our sea passage towards Southampton. I apologise for this short notice change, and I understand that for many it will be a disappointment. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had an interesting voyage with regards to weather, and it is a disappointment that our scheduled last call has to end this way.
Well, a very good afternoon, everyone. This is the captain speaking from the bridge, and with the sounding of the ship's whistles, this now marks midday on our first of 2 sea days down towards Southampton. We do have 563 nautical miles to run until we make our approaches off Nab Tower. Our current position places Skagen, Denmark's northernmost town, some 190 nautical miles out on our port side. We do have mostly overcast skies. However, the sun is occasionally breaking through. On a positive side, we do have an additional sea day with an afternoon and evening on board Queen Victoria to enjoy the luxury of her public rooms.
So instead, a longer stretch at sea. And just like that, we were heading home. And being Good Friday, a reminder of the effort that goes on behind the scenes. By now, we were getting close to home. That day, Dad and I joined a behind-the-scenes tour of the ship, a chance to see the areas most passengers never do, from the bridge to the engine control room. And it turned out to be one of our favourite experiences of the whole trip. And that evening, back in the Commodore Club, a chance to reflect on it all and to enjoy one last evening together. Day 14 and an early return to Southampton. A quiet end to quite a journey. But instead of watching the sun come up here, let's go back to Tromsø. My parents loved their first ever cruise, despite the drama and altered itinerary. In fact, Dad really didn't want to leave the ship. We kept having to stop and wait for him on the way out. And for us, seeing the Northern Lights was something I'll never forget. It felt almost magical, like being a child again and seeing something for the first time. Sleep didn't come easily that night. And looking back now, I'm just deeply grateful. Because it could so easily have gone the other way. A difficult start, hurricane-force winds, a blizzard. At one point, I'd given up on seeing the Northern Lights altogether, which made that moment all the more spellbinding. I'd genuinely love to hear what you think, especially if you've done a trip like this yourself. If you're thinking about a Northern Lights cruise, I hope this has given you a sense of what it's really like. And If you know someone planning one, feel free to share this with them. I'll also be putting together a guide with everything we learned along the way, so do consider subscribing so you're not left in the dark. This trip doesn't come cheaply. Our Queenscrew suite came in at £12,958 with $1,120 US onboard credit included. Mums and dads, slightly less. But it's also possible to do a similar voyage in a standard cabin for a fraction of that. But whichever way you do it, it's a journey you don't forget. Thank you for watching. I'm David from Curious to Travel. Stay curious.